In a monumental case, the U.S. Supreme Court is revisiting the Voting Rights Act, a key piece of civil rights legislation that has long protected minority voters from discrimination. This case, which centers around Louisiana's congressional redistricting, could drastically alter the political landscape in the United States. Specifically, it involves a challenge to the redistricting efforts in Louisiana, which were designed to create more fair representation for black voters. The case has drawn national attention due to its potential to reshape racial considerations in elections, as well as its broader implications for the Voting Rights Act itself. The issue stems from Louisiana's 2022 congressional map, which included only one district with a majority black population, even though black voters make up approximately one-third of the state's total population. Civil rights groups, including the American Civil Liberties Union, ACLU, and other advocacy organizations, argued that this congressional map failed to provide black voters with an equal opportunity to elect candidates of their choice. This prompted a lawsuit, and in response, a federal court ruled that Louisiana's map violated the Voting Rights Act and ordered the state to redraw the district lines to create a second majority black district. Louisiana's GOP-controlled legislature then reworked the map in 2024 to include a second majority black district, but that decision has now been challenged by a group of white voters who argue that such racial considerations in redistricting violate the U.S. Constitution. At the heart of this dispute is Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, a provision that prohibits voting practices that result in racial discrimination. Section 2 has long been a powerful tool in ensuring that racial minorities have a fair opportunity to elect candidates of their choice. The plaintiffs in this case, supported by many conservative legal groups, argue that considering race when drawing district lines is a form of racial gerrymandering, which they claim is unconstitutional. Racial gerrymandering refers to the manipulation of district boundaries to either dilute the voting power of a specific racial group or concentrate them into one district to limit their influence elsewhere. In a broadcast segment designed to discuss the critical implications of this case, political analyst Sarah Turner and civil rights advocate Marcus Williams shared their insights and perspectives on the potential consequences of this legal battle. Turner, a seasoned political analyst, began by explaining the nature of the case. She described how Louisiana's congressional map originally included only one majority black district, despite the state's black population constituting a significant portion of the electorate. She went on to explain that this situation had led to a series of legal challenges by civil rights groups, which ultimately resulted in the federal court ruling that the map was in violation of the Voting Rights Act. Louisiana is not an isolated case, Turner noted. This is a nationwide issue. We're seeing similar challenges in other states where legislators are accused of redrawing district lines to undermine minority political power, either by reducing the number of majority-minority districts or by gerrymandering in ways that dilute the strength of minority voters. Marcus Williams, a civil rights advocate with years of experience working in voting rights, echoed Turner's sentiments but focused on the broader implications of the case for black voters. He emphasized that the stakes were much higher than just the map in Louisiana. This case is about more than just one district in one state. It's about the future of the Voting Rights Act itself. If the Supreme Court rules in favor of the plaintiffs, we could see a significant rollback of the protections that the Voting Rights Act offers to black voters and other marginalized groups, Williams stated. Williams went on to discuss the importance of Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, which prohibits voting practices that discriminate on the basis of race. He argued that Section 2 has been a vital tool for protecting the rights of minority voters, particularly in the South, where racial discrimination in voting has a long and painful history. The Voting Rights Act was passed to address the kind of racial discrimination that was rampant in the South during the 1960s, Williams explained. Its passage marked a turning point in American history, helping to secure the right to vote for millions of black Americans who had been systematically disenfranchised for generations. Turner, in turn, provided a more legalistic perspective on the case, noting that the conservative arguments against the creation of majority black districts revolve around the idea that the Constitution prohibits the use of race in redistricting. The argument from the GOP and conservative groups is essentially that using race as a determining factor in redistricting runs afoul of the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment, Turner explained. They argue that race-neutral districting is the ideal, and that drawing districts based primarily on racial demographics is not only unnecessary but unconstitutional. Despite these legal challenges, civil rights groups, including the NAACP and the ACLU, have strongly defended the principle of race-conscious redistricting as essential for ensuring that minority voters are not disenfranchised. They argue that without such measures, black voters and other racial minorities would have limited political power, especially in states with significant minority populations. The creation of majority-minority districts is not about favoring one race over another. It's about ensuring that the voices of historically disenfranchised communities are heard, Williams asserted. The case has also brought attention to the broader issue of racial gerrymandering, which has been a growing concern in the United States in recent years. Many observers have pointed out that racial gerrymandering, whether aimed at diluting the power of minority voters or concentrating them into a small number of districts, undermines the core democratic principle of fair representation. In response to this growing issue, several organizations, including the Brennan Center for Justice, have called for stronger protections against racial gerrymandering and more transparent redistricting processes. This case is part of a larger movement we're seeing across the country, where states are increasingly engaged in partisan and racial gerrymandering to gain a political advantage, Turner noted. The result is that voters are being split up or packed into districts in ways that distort the democratic process. The challenge is ensuring that the redistricting process is fair and transparent, and that minority voters have the opportunity to elect candidates of their choice. As the case makes its way through the courts, the impact of the decision will likely extend far beyond Louisiana. If the Supreme Court rules in favor of the plaintiffs and weakens Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, it could have far-reaching consequences for voting rights in other states, especially in the South. States with large minority populations, including Georgia, Alabama, and Mississippi, could face new challenges to their redistricting practices, potentially leading to a reduction in the number of majority black districts and a decrease in political representation for minority communities. In addition to the legal ramifications, the case is also significant from a political perspective. A ruling that weakens the Voting Rights Act would likely embolden Republican-controlled legislatures to push for more restrictive voting laws, including voter ID requirements, reduced early voting hours, and other measures aimed at making it harder for certain groups, particularly Black and Latino voters, to cast ballots. This has been a growing concern in the wake of the 2020 election, when many states passed new laws restricting access to the ballot box under the guise of election security. The fight over voting rights is far from over, Williams remarked. What's happening in Louisiana is just one part of a much larger effort to undermine the progress we've made over the past several decades. If the Supreme Court rules in favor of the plaintiffs, it could set the stage for a whole new round of voter suppression tactics that target black voters and other communities of color. Looking ahead, Turner acknowledged that the outcome of the case would likely depend on the composition of the Supreme Court and the ideological leanings of its justices. It's difficult to predict how the court will rule, she said, but we know that the current court has been less sympathetic to voting rights claims in the past, particularly after the 2013 Shelby County decision, which effectively gutted the heart of the Voting Rights Act. If the court rules against the Voting Rights Act in this case, it could further erode the protections that have been in place for decades. The case's timing is also critical. As the 2024 election season heats up, the political stakes are higher than ever. If the court's ruling significantly alters the interpretation of the Voting Rights Act, it could have profound consequences for the upcoming elections, particularly in states where black voters play a decisive role in determining election outcomes. Civil rights groups and advocates are closely monitoring the case, as they prepare for a battle that could define the future of voting rights in America. In conclusion, the Supreme Court's decision in this case could be one of the most significant rulings in recent years regarding the future of the Voting Rights Act and the protection of minority voters' rights. With the case's potential to reshape the political landscape in Louisiana and beyond, it will be closely watched by policymakers, legal experts, and advocates alike. As the case moves forward, it is clear that the outcome will have lasting implications for the future of voting rights and racial justice in the United States.